Hello, I'm Steve Barrett and welcome to the Save Funeral Costs Fighting Funeral Poverty podcast. During these podcasts, I will be interviewing people associated with funerals, bereavement and grief. Hello everybody, I want to welcome today Lindesay Mace, who is the co-manager of Down to Earth, run by Quaker Social Action. Hello Lindesay, thank you for joining me.
Hi Steve, thanks for having me on.
Would you like to explain to the listeners more about Down to Earth and your role within Down to Earth?
Sure. So Down to Earth is a project that's been running since 2010, and is run by the anti-poverty and social justice charity Quaker Social Action. And Down to Earth aims to reduce funeral poverty. So that's when people are faced with funeral costs that they can't afford. And the core of the project is the service we provide for those people facing unaffordable funeral costs. So on Quaker Social Action or QSA, on the QSA website, the Down to Earth pages, which contain lots of expert online resources. They were visited by nearly 20,000 people in 2024, 2025.
That's
So we
very
have
good.
those. So we have those digital guides and tools that are aimed to really help people make choices that will make things as affordable as possible while also being meaningful. But then for those in the greatest need, we also offer one-to-one phone support for people on low incomes and benefits where the funeral has not happened yet. So that's just a crucial point to make, is that because of capacity, we're a very small team. We're unfortunately only able to support people where the funeral has not yet taken place. And despite being a small team, we did manage to support nearly 1,000 people last year. So yeah, working very hard as you can imagine. And then that work, the work that my colleagues on the phones carry out, and the stories that they hear, the often incredibly heartbreaking stories that they hear, then informs the work that I do. So I work on trying to change policy within central government, local government, and sort of policy and practice within the funeral industry as well, all informed by the by what our clients tell us, basically.
Yes.
Um,
So how do you get on with central and local government?
as you'll be aware, the the narrative coming out of government is that there isn't any money to spend, and so sort of trying to make changes around welfare policy, like the benefit that some people can get from the Department of Work and Pensions to help with funeral costs, is something of a challenge. It's something that we're campaigning on at the moment, which I can perhaps talk a bit more about later. And local government, as I think we're going to come to, they are struggling themselves without sufficient funds from
Yes,
central government.
yes, yes.
So yeah, unfortunately, that money talks, as they say, and does create something of a challenge for campaigners on all sorts of issues.
Yes, I think well, as you just said, a lot of councils throughout the UK now are cash strapped. They're just very short of money.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, indeed.
what made you join Down to Earth?
So the job sparked my interest because a few years before I'd actually seen a powerful play by a human rights theatre company called Ice and Fire, and the play was called The 9 o'clock Slot, and it used real life accounts of funerals that were arranged and paid for by local councils.
Oh,
The title 9 o'clock slot because most of those funerals are carried out sort of early in the day.
Hmm.
Um, and I know we'll come to that topic later, but yeah, it was a very powerful piece. But really, that was the entirety of my understanding of funeral poverty.
Oh,
When I saw this job advertised on the Down to Earth, at the time it was a job on the Down to Earth helpline, where I started. I didn't really know anything much about funeral poverty, and then I began reading about it as I was preparing for the interview. And the stories were just heartbreaking. And I've always passionately believed in social justice, and equality, and it was really clear to me that it was an important issue that just wasn't known about enough.
yes, you're quite right there.
And
There's a
yeah,
lot of
it,
ignorance there, isn't there? I don't mean people are ignorant, but I mean they're just unaware, and a lot of people are just unaware of the problem throughout the UK.
yeah, and I mean, to be honest, I would say I would include I would include uh, decision makers in that as
Hmm.
well. I would include parliamentarians and
Yes.
people at the the top of decision making in this country as not being aware enough of this issue, and that is part of the problem. So yeah, I mean, I firmly believe that everyone has the right to a dignified funeral, and
Yes.
all bereaved people have the right to be able to grieve the death of a family member or friend in peace without being fearful of how they will pay the bill. And I wanted to be a part of making that happen. And so yeah, as soon as I read about the issue and read about the job, I thought, yeah, this sounds like something that I want to be a part of.
So going to the play and the job itself all seemed to like come hand in hand there, then didn't they, within a short time frame?
Yes, yeah, it was one of those sort of strange things about the universe, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. Just uh, stepping back one, I wanted to say as well, I know you did mention it, just to make it very clear to the listeners that you do offer, as you said, very good PDFs and clear literature, which is easy to download, and easy to read. It's written in a very clear format to help people. So anybody listening to this, just wanted to make that very clear as well. I try and make it very simple as well on my site and talking very simple English language. And I've got like a low cost funeral planning guide, and I make that very simple. And I think it's very good that you do the same there. The down to earth offer the same simplistic literature, because I think that's very important.
Yeah, thank you. We're going through a bit of a process, or have been and still are going through a process to really kind of strengthen that as much as possible to make sure it is as clear as possible. And like yeah, I mean, yeah, you do very well on your website in that sense as well. Maybe it's worth me mentioning a specific tool that we have on our website, which is, as far as we're aware, the only eligibility checker that exists for the funeral expenses payment, which is that benefit that some people
Yes,
who
I've looked at
are
that. Yeah.
yeah, some people who are in receipt of income related benefits can access the funeral expenses payment, but the eligibility criteria is incredibly complicated.
Hmm.
So yes, my colleague, with help from the team, created an eligibility checker for people planning an adult's funeral, to try to help them navigate that complex criteria. So that can be found on our website as well.
Yeah, that is very useful. And you are quite right there. It's quite complicated, like the criteria for claiming at times, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, um, you've explained really then how Down to Earth helps people who are struggling to pay a funeral bill. Now, according to Sun Life's cost of dying report in 2022, it says that it stated that 83% of UK adults did not shop around for funeral costs, or just got one quote. Now, thankfully, that figure has gone down by 20% in the Sun Life's Cost of Dying Report 2025, as it now stands at 63%. So that's good. In other words, more people are shopping around. Um, However, most people are still simply unaware of lower cost options. Now, in your experience, what are the main factors that contribute to funeral poverty beyond basic lack of awareness, and around the cost of differences between providers? What else would you say contributes?
So first of all, just agree that shopping around funeral directors can potentially save people over £1,000 for the same service, depending on the
Mm-hmm.
area. So absolutely, we agree. We advise people to get at least two, if not three, quotes.
Quotes, oh yes.
Um, yeah, and I agree that greater public awareness of that huge variation in price between different companies would be beneficial, but there are many understandable reasons why people don't shop around, rather than it perhaps just being a lack of awareness of lower
Mm-hmm.
cost options. I'd just say that firstly, that Sun Life also say they found in that report that 45% of deceased people identified the funeral director that they wanted. So although that doesn't mean that their families can't change that choice, and sometimes that is a really sensible thing to do, especially if paying for the funeral is challenging and changing funeral director means they'll face lower costs. But people can find it really difficult to change the choices made by the person who has died.
Yes.
And we also find people favour recommendations of companies, or they simply can't face the emotional toil of shopping around.
I think
So
that's, sorry, cutting you off. I think that you've definitely hit the nail on the head there. That's what I get from a lot of people. It's the emotional toil of shopping around.
yeah,
They just don't want to do
yeah,
it at that particular time.
yeah. It's an understandably
Yes,
difficult thing
yes, yeah.
it's especially if it involves having conversations with funeral directors more than once.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is, of course, why it is easier now that all funeral directors legally have to put their prices online.
Yes,
That that should hopefully be making it easier for people. But so I guess because of all of those things, I wouldn't personally class shopping around as a contributory factor for funeral poverty. And in many ways, I'd say the need to shop around is perhaps a symptom of funeral poverty, if you like.
yes.
Um, because while getting quotes might reduce the amount of debt someone takes on, which is, of course, a positive thing, the reality we hear every day from our clients is that even where people do shop around and reduce the bill, they still experience funeral poverty. So coming to your question about, sort of what the main factors are that contribute to funeral
Mm-hmm.
poverty. I mean, until 2019, the funeral industry was completely unregulated, with no requirement at that point to even display prices.
Prices, yeah.
And the Competition and Markets Authority found that funeral directors in general were overcharging bereaved
Mm-hmm.
people, and that they were not getting good value for money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, that can really be seen in the Sun Life cost of dying reports, where they've tracked funeral inflation since 2004 and show that it has risen by 134%.
Yes.
And that, I mean, that's huge. That's way more than way more of a rise than other things like food items, such as milk. I mean, it's even more than house price inflation. Um, but as we were saying just then, then in late 2019, since then it has been a legal requirement for funeral directors to
The
display their
display.
prices.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's in an attempt to encourage competition and improve the market for consumers. And there have been some drops in prices, but it's not clear across the board, and the drops are not enough yet to counteract those above inflation price rises that we saw for at least 14 years. And outside of that price transparency regulation, the industry is still otherwise completely unregulated in England,
Yes,
Wales, and Northern Ireland.
yes.
And until that changes, which it desperately needs to, there's no hope of the government even considering price controls. So that's the kind of the basic landscape, and then on top of that, you have wages and benefits not keeping up with that high funeral inflation. So,
Yes, yeah.
millions of people don't have enough income to put food on the table, let alone to save for their funeral or pay for the funeral of a family member.
Hmm.
And those, I just want to end by kind of talking about. So we've mentioned a little bit the funeral benefits that are available from the government. For some people, but these are inadequate in terms of how much they pay, because the portion of the payment that is available for funeral director fees is way too low. So in Scotland, that portion of the payment pays only 51% of the average funeral director fee
Hmm.
for a
Hmm.
simple
Hmm.
attended funeral.
Hmm.
Um, as like going by the sort of average funeral director fees gathered by the Competition and Markets Authority. And in England and Wales is even worse. So in England and Wales, the portion of the funeral payment that pays for funeral director fees pays just 40% of the
Yeah, yeah,
average
yeah.
funeral director
Mm.
fee. So the wages haven't kept up, benefits like normal income benefits like universal credit haven't kept up, and funeral benefits also haven't kept up. And then on top of that, we were talking about the eligibility criteria for particularly for the funeral expenses payment in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland being incredibly complicated.
Hmm.
And it is, I would describe it as rather than the criteria sort of being aimed at trying to help the person that's applying, you know, seeking a way to help them, seeking a way to award them that benefit. Really, the criteria is aimed at trying to find a way not to award them benefit,
Yeah.
by looking at other family members of the person who died and looking at their benefit status.
Hmm.
Um, and and it is just divorced from real life situations, complex family dynamics, and we can see how that is the case when we look at Scotland, which has had its own version of the payment since 2019, I think, which is called the funeral support payment. And in Scotland, 40% more people can access a funeral payment.
Mm.
It's not acceptable to have that discrepancy between nations within the UK. So Westminster and the Department for Work and Pensions really needs to step up and bring the funeral expenses payment in line with the funeral support payment, which is something that we're campaigning for at the moment.
Oh, that's very good. I was going to say, did you want to, excuse me, did you want to briefly explain to the listeners about the funeral expenses payment? I mean, what it is, it's £1,000, isn't it? And then you've got the second claim as well, haven't you, for other expenses? Did you want to briefly explain to them?
Yeah, sure. So the funeral expenses payment in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland is available for people to apply for it if they are in receipt of an income related benefit.
Benefits, yes, yes,
That's the initial core requirement, is that you have to be in receipt of an income related
yes.
benefit. Then, as I was saying, there are further complex criteria, and it would be good for people to check out our eligibility checker. But if people are able to access that payment, it's £1,000 towards the funeral director fees, the flowers, the officiant or minister, the coffin, all of that, the portion that is not paying enough. It's not just that. Then in addition, it's what they call reasonable costs, the crematorium
Yes.
or the cemetery. So the Department of Work and Pensions will pay the least expensive available option
Yes.
for the cemetery or for the
Cremation.
crematorium,
Yes. Yeah.
and then they will also pay this up to
Right.
£1,000
Yeah.
essentially for all the other costs. And in Scotland, it's the funeral support payment, and I forget the exact amount. That is essentially it's a very similar structure in terms of how much you get,
Mm.
but instead of it being £1,000 towards those other costs, it's something like 1,275.
Yeah.
It is because in Scotland they have been increasing that amount with inflation each year. And so, yeah, Scotland are sort of leading the way, although it's still not high enough. It still doesn't pay enough, but they are leading the way more than
In England.
the yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
but yeah, the other one is the bereavement support payment, which is available to people where their husband, wife, or civil partner dies, um, but also where the person making the application is below state pension age. And but there's also other newer criteria where if you're cohabiting with a partner and you have dependent children and your cohabiting partner dies, then you can also make a claim. And there is a different amount for if you have dependent children or if you don't have dependent children. You get more if you have dependent children to look after.
Bereavement support payment. Just refresh my memory. Well, and obviously educate the listeners. Is that totally independent of the funeral expenses payment?
They are completely independent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you can claim both, and the bereavement support payment is not related to income
Income.
or
No.
income related benefits. It's not means tested.
No.
You just have to meet the other criteria
Yeah.
around being under state pension age. The person who died has to have paid a certain amount of national insurance contributions, so that there are various things to be aware of. But
Yes.
essentially, if your spouse, civil partner, or cohabiting partner dies, it's worth you checking the eligibility criteria,
Yes.
basically.
Yes. It certainly is. Both of those are payments, aren't they?
So the bereavement support payment is just a benefit, a grant, if you
Yeah.
like. There's no requirement to pay it back at all. Funeral expenses payment and the funeral support payment in Scotland, they do both have something of a status as a loan. For the majority of people, it will just be money that you get and you don't have to pay anything back. And you as the claimant, you don't have to pay anything of your own money back, but it's to do with whether the person who died left any money, example, in a bank account or a savings account, or maybe they left a property. So if they left any what is often called estate, in that sense, then the government expects to and has the right to either deduct that money from the award before they give you the funeral payment, or if that money is not available to you at that point, then they may contact you afterwards and say, when the deceased estate does become available, when that money does become available, then you need to pay back the money that we gave you for the funeral payment.
Thanks for explaining all that. Now, funeral prices. Why do you think there's such a huge difference in funeral prices?
There are some huge differences in price between funeral directors, and some with some companies, it is very hard to see how they're justifying that. But as you sort of indicated in terms of it sort of not necessarily just being about funeral directors. I mean, one of the causes of increases recently has actually been crematorium fees.
Hmm.
So, I think that also needs quite a bit of focus. Is the rises in crematorium fees over the last few years, and burial fees, particularly even more so in London, which is where our office is based, because the availability of space is reduced and reducing, and that is contributing to, I believe, I suspect, the rises in cemetery fees.
Hmm.
So some burial fees are really extortionate. I mean, in London, you can be looking at 5, 7, 8,000 pounds
Hmm.
just for the cemetery fees themselves.
Hmm.
So that's something that needs addressing as well.
Yes. And now, it seems that public health funerals are very much a bit of a lottery where you live and how easy they are to access. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Our research shows that to be the case. So, I mean, first of all, I don't know if it's worth just explaining what a council funeral is, or a public health funeral, as you
Yes.
said.
Yeah.
So where this is where there no one else is making arrangements for that funeral for whatever reason. No arrangements are being made, and therefore the local authority has a legal duty to arrange a burial or a
Burial,
cremation
cremation.
for
Yes.
that person who has died. Anyone who has died in their local authority area, or who has been found dead in their area.
Hmm.
Um, but it's worth also, I thought I'd also just say that although the legal duty falls to councils, some hospitals take on this responsibility rather than the local council. It depends on the area. And interestingly, literally today, a report came out, it's reported in the BBC, from the ESRC Centre for Population Change, or the CPC. They found a quarter of all state-funded funerals in England are carried out by NHS hospitals. So
Wow.
it's actually quite, yeah.
Uh,
I was slightly
mm,
surprised
I
by
would,
the
yes, it's a
the
large portion.
yeah. So it's worth us not sort of forgetting hospitals in that context. But you're absolutely right. I guess particularly in in councils, it can be incredibly difficult just to make contact with the right department. So there's no standardization. So it can be in the bereavement department, the adult social care department, it can be in financial affairs, it can even, which um, must be quite difficult to deal with when you're a bereaved person, it can also be in environmental health,
Mm.
because of the fact that the legislation sits in public health um, uh, legislation. Um, so yeah, so there not being any standardization, and it being potentially being in one of many departments doesn't help. And we carried out some research in 2023, which we looked at 102 councils across the UK, and more than a third of those councils had no information online for the public about their council funeral
Hmm.
provision.
Hmm.
And of those that did have information, over a quarter gave no contact details for people who need to notify their local authority of a death requiring a council funeral. So, you don't know what department it is, you don't have a contact number, or even necessarily any information that this service, if you like, exists. And so then you're sort of calling the switchboard, and a lot of switchboard operators we found in our research. So we carried out we carried out calls to, we had volunteers who were sort of posing as the friend of a bereaved person
Yes.
undertaking these calls, and lots of switchboard operators and staff in sort of departments that we were put through to that weren't the right department. Lots of people didn't know themselves what a council funeral was, let alone which department dealt with them. And in a few cases, we had to go through 8 calls or transfers to reach the right department. So yeah, I mean, that's frustrating at the best of times, but
Oh, good
imagine
grief, yeah.
doing that as
A
a
bereaved
bereaved
person, you
person.
don't need that, no. No.
I mean, it's worth saying that some councils we did get through to in one call, and that shows that it's possible to have good systems in place that look after your residents and your bereaved people, and that systems that also save the council staff time,
Yes.
because that's the other thing. But of course, getting through to the right department isn't is just the first battle, and I think that's sort of part of what you were probably referring to, is that when you do get through to the right department, you might still be presented with barriers. So we were able to sort of conclude our sort of research and our calls with 47 councils, and nearly a quarter of those councils turned our volunteer away or presented them with significant barriers. And the most common one was to say that because you're a family member of the person who's died, that means that we won't carry out a funeral. We only do it if there's no family members
Yes.
surviving, and that's not what the legislation says. It simply says if no arrangements are being made, then the legal duty falls to the council.
Yes.
So yeah, it can be something of a challenge to kind of find your way through all of that, especially if you don't know what the law says, which most people won't.
That's very frustrating and very annoying. We're nearly out of time here, Lindsay. I want to say thank you very much for talking today. If we've got time, what do you think might change in the funeral industry in the next 2 years? Bit of a loaded question, that. Putting you on the spot.
Well, I would say that I would hope, and I would be very shocked and surprised if the UK government was not to bring in full-scale regulation of the funeral industry. I hope independent regulation, because they have been called on to do that by the Competition and Markets Authority and by the Fuller Inquiry, and it's really urgently something that they need to do.
Yes. Well, thank you very much again for talking and sharing your knowledge, and well done again for all the services that you offer. I don't just mean you
Oh,
personally, I mean down to earth I'm talking about.
thanks very much. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time. Yes, it's been great to speak to you, and thank you for everything you do with your website to help people too.